1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000. For you, just numbers perhaps. For the Israeli Prime Minister, though, those are the monikers for 3 cases that he's found himself embroiled in. In fact, police investigators today questioned him and his wife, Sarah Netanyahu, as part of the probe into a case that has come to be called 4,000. Aisha Sindhu with the lowdown on what he's suspected of and how the investigation comes at a most inopportune time.
The Israeli Prime Minister had the police come visiting Friday, and it wasn't a courtesy call. Investigators arrived at Benjamin Netanyahu's Jerusalem residence to question him in the Bezek corruption case. Local media reports suggest that the development indicates that the Prime Minister will, in all likelihood, be treated as a suspect in the case. And it's not him alone. His wife Sarah was simultaneously questioned as a suspect in the same case at the anti-corruption unit's headquarters. Worse still, the developments come just a day ahead of Prime Minister Netanyahu's week-long visit to the United States. So what exactly is the Bezek case, or Case 4000 as it's come to be known? In layman's terms, it's classic quid pro quo. Shaul Elovich, the chief shareholder of communications giant Bezek, is accused of providing favourable coverage to the Netanyahus on the Walla news site. In return, the Prime Minister is accused of pushing regulations that benefited Elovich and Bezek. Local media also says that investigators are in possession of damning correspondence between Mrs. Netanyahu and Elovich's daughter-in-law. In it, Mrs. Netanyahu reportedly demands a reworking of coverage on the first couple that appeared on the Walla website. In the WhatsApp text, Sarah reportedly writes, quote, "You're killing us, you're slaughtering us, you're destroying the state. What type of site is this? Change this, do something with this. You're the owners of the site, this should happen quickly." End quote. The Netanyahus have been vociferous in denying the allegations against them, but it should be noted here that the Prime Minister held the communications portfolio from 2014 to 2017. According to investigators, Walla's coverage became notably favourable for the Netanyahu family during this time. Unfortunately for the Israeli Prime Minister, his woes don't end at Case 4000. There's also the little matter of Cases 1,000, 2,000 and 3,000. In the first, Netanyahu and his wife are suspected of receiving gifts from Hollywood producer Arnon Milchan and Australian hotelier James Packer, these to the tune of nearly $300,000 US. Case 2000 involves a suspected deal between Netanyahu and the newspaper publisher Arnon Moses. The allegation here is that the Prime Minister weakened a rival paper for favourable coverage in Moses's publication, the most widely distributed daily in Israel. And last but not the least is Case 3000. This involves suspected corruption in the purchase of submarines and naval vessels from a German shipbuilder, a case in which Mr. Netanyahu probably had to give testimony on Friday as well. With police recommending just last month that the Israeli Prime Minister be indicted for charges ranging from bribery to fraud in a series of corruption cases, the year ahead looks like a challenging one for the man who's been elected Israel's Prime Minister the most number of times. Aisha Sindhu, WION.
So what's happening in Syria? In how many pockets of the country is this war being fought? At this point, in fact, there are 2 separate wars going on in Syria. One focused on eastern Ghouta near the capital Damascus, the other centered around the Kurdish enclave of Afrin in the north. There could be a smaller conflict shaping up which involves the Islamic State, but more of that later. Let's begin with eastern Ghouta. It is strategically located about 10 kilometers from the capital Damascus, and that is what makes this place very, very important. That is why the Syrian army is so anxious to wrest it from the control of Islamic militants. Eastern Ghouta is a suburb of the capital Damascus. It has been under siege since 2013, and now Syrian forces are reportedly massing for a major ground assault here. Hundreds have reportedly died in Syrian army shelling and Russian airstrikes in this small enclave. The ground assault could be even more bloody since the Islamic groups are well entrenched and armed. From Ghouta to the Kurdish-held enclave of Afrin, that's towards the north, Syria's border with Turkey. This is Ghouta, and the next theatre of war we're talking about is Afrin, and this is coming under attack from Turkey and its allies in the Free Syrian Army since late January. Western analysts quoting Kurdish leaders expect Turks to besiege Afrin and its 400,000 residents. This is Afrin. Shelling has been underway for some time now in this region, and Turkish airstrikes are anticipated, which will further devastate the city. The Kurds do not expect Russia or the US to intervene. They believe this is their war. Both countries want to preserve their ties with Turkey. There could be a third war shaping up, as we said earlier, and this could be around Deir ez-Zor. It involves the Islamic State, and this is towards the far east of Syria. This group has virtually collapsed, but the diversion of government troops in eastern Ghouta and Kurdish forces to Afrin may have created a vacuum here. Small attacks by the Islamic State have been noticed and could gain a strength as the Kurds and the Syrian army remain preoccupied elsewhere. This is how Syria is placed today. Afrin here, Ghouta here, and Deir ez-Zor, and there could be many other smaller pockets where Islamic fighters are engaged with the government. This war is far from over. And joining me on this edition of Gravitas is a very special guest, Mr. Riyad Abbas. He's the Syrian ambassador to India. Also with us is Daniele Pagani, WION's West Asia bureau chief, who's been tracking the war in Syria and filing reports very regularly. Good evening to both of you. Mr. Abbas, to you first, sir. How do you describe the situation in Syria in general and Eastern Ghouta in particular?
First of all, good evening and happy Holi for all. Before intervening for Ghouta issue, we have to understand what is the general view on Middle East. Why is Ghouta is now? What happened? For what? Understand. First of all, I would like to say that all countries who are involved on Syrian issues, they are in trouble now. Understand, and they cannot pull out from this issue before solving the Syrian issue.
Yes.
America now, all its followers are defeated by Syrian army, start from Free Syrian Army, from ISIS, and now the Kurdish who are controlled by America. Now American army face to face with the Syrian army. Second, Saudi Arabia.
No, all that is fine. I know you're trying to look at the big picture. But
that is the main issue for Ghouta.
Okay.
Those countries, which I will mention, they have the hand who they are behind the Ghouta issue. Understand?
What is the Ghouta issue?
Ghouta issue, those countries are in trouble around Syria, in Yemen, Turkey in trouble, Saudi Arabia in trouble, Jordan opens the border, Israeli targeted by old missile, and they throw down the new Israeli fighter over Palestine the first time. That is why they changed the equity in Middle East.
That is why the Syrian army is bombing its people in Ghouta.
Yes, the Syrian army now, he has immediate action against any Israeli fighter go over Syria. In the past, it was not like that. The equity is changed now in Middle East because of Syrian army and become strong and more stronger. How they will pull out, how they will create problem for...
I'm not talking about a pull out.
Now that is why they create the problem in Ghouta. And a big surprise for us.
Who is they? The Israelis?
Israelis, American, Saudi, Qatarian, Turkish.
But the people dying are the Syrians.
Who told you? Why you don't ask me about the civilian who, the innocent civilian in Damascus, 5 million civilian who are targeted every day by missile from terror groups from Ghouta. Any country has a right to protect its people.
So you're saying people, I'm asking you, I'm trying to understand, because independent verification is very difficult, so I'm asking you, you're saying that people in Ghouta are mostly terrorists?
Mostly terrorism. There is no civilian, there is only 60 or 70 civilian who are the family.
60 or 70?
Only. Who are the families of rebels and the mercenaries who came to Ghouta to fight against our country and against our army.
So 129 children who died, some of them were terrorists?
Very big propaganda. Who are those child is not available. They make propaganda like a film cinema like actors, and after that you will see this child who has died in this in Khan Sheikhon. You will see him in Ghouta, and you will see in other areas.
So you're saying the children are not dying?
No, at all.
There are 60 or 70 civilians present in Eastern Ghouta. The rest of them are terrorists. That's
a big surprise for us how our army attacked Ghouta, and they select only children to die. Only children.
No, I didn't say that. I think 500 people died, out of which 129 were children, according to international media
according
reports.
To rebels' information and their sponsor only.
So you're saying all of it is false?
Yes.
Daniele, you've been tracking the situation there. You've been speaking to our colleague also in Eastern Ghouta, and you've been speaking to others. What is your assessment of the situation, and how would you respond to what the ambassador has just said?
I have to respectfully disagree with almost everything the ambassador is saying. When it comes to the exact number of civilians, yes, we do not know how many civilians precisely died. You said independent verification is impossible, but to say that most of the inhabitants of Eastern Ghouta, which is a vast and large area comprising many towns and cities and villages, are only terrorists is not an exact information. The last UN report that we have talks about 400,000 people. It could be less, but this is the international recognized figure of people living in Eastern Ghouta, and to say that they are all terrorists would be to credit too much the anti-Assad Islamist rebels there. They do not have that many fighters. There are several rebel groups active right now in Eastern Ghouta. One of them particularly comes from the former Jabhat al-Nusra. It is believed, according to the data that we have in the media community all over the world, that they are not more than 250 fighters. I'm talking to the Al-Qaeda affiliated. The rest are in the tens of thousands. Civilians are dying in Ghouta. The ceasefire is not in place. The Syrian army is attacking the southeast of Ghouta. They say they are fighting against anti-government armed rebels, and they have the right to do so. Absolutely, every country has the right to protect its citizen and itself from organization which it perceives as terrorist. But the problem is that under airstrikes, when it comes to such a densely populated areas, civilians also become a target, and especially when airstrikes go on for years.
I'd like you to respond to this, and I also want you to tell me, is the ceasefire, is the humanitarian pause, the Russia-backed humanitarian pause, really in effect? And if so, why aren't these people leaving?
Because the rebels in Ghouta doesn't allow him to go out of Ghouta, because they took him like a siege front of them. Understand? As I said for you, the number of civilians which they talk about them in Ghouta, they are few people, not the rebels, more than the civilian in Ghouta. And as he said, yes, we have right to protect our people. He saw the Ghouta, what happened in Ghouta, Mr. Daniel. Let him see also what happened in Damascus. You can ask your ambassador in Damascus what happened in Damascus. There is more than 6 million civilians living in Damascus, and they are targeted by those terror groups, by their missile every day. Hit our capital city.
That's the difference between a government and a terror group. A terror group does not follow those ethics. A terror group uses human shields, but a government cannot.
Which human? Which human?
You said that civilians are not being allowed to leave because the terrorists...
Who prevents the
terrorists?
Terrorists, yes.
But what is it?
Give me your idea how we solve this case.
I don't know. I'm asking you a question, sir. This is the difference between a government and a terror group. A government has to take into account the fact that there might be civilians, there might be children, and they cannot be...
That is why the war in Syria remained 7 years. If we don't care for civilian, within 1 month we can delete all the terror groups in the ground. We took our duty for civilian, and we open safety way for civilian to come, and we give him, provide him food and medical issue and everything. But terror group doesn't allow them to pull out. Understand? And all sponsor of those terror groups in United Nations call for ceasefire. If you are right to make peace in Syria, why don't call for political solution? Why you ask only for ceasefire? Understand? When our army achieved to control the area and defeat terror groups in the ground, immediately the sponsor of terror groups shouting in Security Council. We discovered that ISIS have representative on Security Council made by America and French and UK and their followers. Understand?
They're supporting
yes, definitely. Who create ISIS? The same country who create Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. They are behind ISIS. Why we need to hide ourselves and we don't know who support terrorism in the ground? Who create terrorism? From where terrorism it came? You have to understand and you have to know. And who used terrorism against our country? Who used terrorism against Syria? And those people who ask for ceasefire in Ghouta, they have to ask for political solution, not for ceasefire. Why you ask for ceasefire?
Okay. Daniele, is ceasefire the wrong solution that the parties involved are looking at? And also, does the Syrian government and the Syrian army really have a choice? Because this is a war, and they have an adversary, they have an enemy, and they have to fight.
First of all, I want to make it very clear that no one here is denying that also the Islamist armed groups fighting against President Bashar al-Assad inside eastern Ghouta are targeting Damascus areas where also civilians live, and civilians are also suffering in Damascus in rebel-held areas. No one is denying it. This is a war. Both parties are targeting civilians. When you ask me if the Syrian army had a choice, yes, they did have a choice. The choice normally, when you have a densely populated area where non-state actors are holed up and fighting against the government, is to send the infantry in. We have seen this happening, for instance, in eastern Mosul. You need to limit as much as possible the number of airstrikes in order to save civilians. Also, the ambassador says that who is asking for the ceasefire is not asking for the political solution. I do not agree. Here everyone asks for a political solution. It is desperate, the situation, but not only in eastern Ghouta, also in other areas. Even the United States is not respecting the ceasefire. For instance, a few days ago, they bombed an area reported killing 24 civilians. So the problem is that until and unless all the actors on the ground and also the Syrian government decide to stop firing even a single bullet in eastern Ghouta, civilians are not allowed to flee. Only when all the actors will stop firing, then we can see who will allow civilians to leave and who will allow the humanitarian convoys to reach them. As of now, everyone seems to have a good reason to keep fighting, but this is not as it should be.
Absolutely, and the other fundamental difference, Ambassador Abbas, is that all these other players have probably been instrumental in making the mess that Syria is today, but they can pull out any day. This is your country. These are your people.
Yes.
We've heard from people in eastern Ghouta and other parts who say that we're waiting for our turn to die. We're waiting for the bombs to rain on us. And this is not, as Daniele said, the only theater of war there. There's Afrin, there are other pockets. So it seems that you flush out militants, you flush out the Islamists from one side of the country, and they regroup and re-emerge on another side. Is there an end in sight to this war?
Okay, my dear, everybody speak about the innocent in Ghouta and nobody speak for the innocent in Afrin, nobody speak for the innocent in Damascus. Understand? Why, surprise for me, why those countries would like to support terrorism in our ground? The Security Council decision gives the authority for our army to follow ISIS and Nusrat Front on Ghouta. And we are following them. And when we will achieve the victory, you raise your voice in the international arena. Definitely, maybe if there is some civilian, if there is some innocent people will die, maybe. But not our target, not our aims to kill civilians. We are following those terror groups who came from outside of Syria. Understand? There is more than 100 mercenaries in Ghouta now. Understand? Tell me what the government has to do. Did you hear in all tires the world there is opposition holding weapons and tank and missile and attack the government? Only in Syria available this, and those rebels who holding tanks and weapons get support from outside. There is external intervention in Syria, and they ask for humanitarian issue. How they can smuggle tanks and weapons into Ghouta, and they can't smuggle 1 kg of rice into Ghouta. This is a very big joke. Don't understand for Western media. Don't listen for propaganda media.
That's why we have
yes,
we want to have it from the government as its representative.
The truth and the reality is there is a big army of mercenaries in Ghouta, hostage some civilian to protect themselves by civilian. Okay. Understand? But those terror groups attack our civilian also in our capital. What we should do? Only we stay quiet and we tell for terror groups, come please, don't hit us, don't kill us. What we should do? Any government in the world has the right to protect its civilian by any way it like to make stability and security. Why only Syria has this right to do it? I don't know why. Big surprise for us.
Okay. Daniele Pagani, closing comments. At the beginning of this year, the Russian president, who's played a vital role in the situation in Syria, suggested that the war is drawing to a conclusion. The only thing that I can say for sure is that that is far from the truth.
I can only agree with you. We had Turkey invading Syria in the north in Afrin. We have the United States keep fighting against Islamic State in pockets of eastern part of Syria. We have a situation in eastern Ghouta where the Syrian troops are advancing in the southeastern part, and the Islamists are targeting both Damascus and the troops advancing. This is not something which means that the end of the war is near. And there is then Idlib, another rebel-held area in Syria, which will need to be taken into account sooner or later. So I have also to disagree with the President of Russia, Putin, when he says that the war is nearing an end. And this is unfortunate because Syria has been suffering for way too many years.
Absolutely, and you can dispute the numbers. You can say not 100, not 500, but you cannot dispute the fact that people are being killed. People who have... This war wasn't of their making and they have nothing to do with it, and yet they're caught in the crossfire. Daniele Pagani, Ambassador Abbas, thanks very much. Appreciate you joining us here on Gravitas, sir, and for taking these questions. And we hope the situation resolves sooner rather than later.